Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to a surprise return to Zombiesploitation in a different setup here. Hold on one second, let me move it. Part of my squeaky ass chair. Hopefully it's not so bad. I finally have a office swivel chair. Man, I'm just upgrading myself left and right. um Also, if I seem like kind of obnoxiously shiny, it's because it's the middle of summer and it's like 85 degrees outside, so I'm warm. So, yeah, once again, yes, welcome back to Zombiesploitation, a little series that I kickstarted last year around this time. Um, I don't know if I'll do as many episodes this time around for Zombiesploitation, but with today's subject matter, I figured it would be appropriate if I added this into Zombiesploitation. But what better way to kick off the return of Zombiesploitation with a big bang? Today, I will be reviewing the critically acclaimed 2023 HBO series, The Last of Us. I would have bought the show on DVD because it just came out late last month, but it's like $30 for season one, and it's only 9 episodes long. I don't think so. I wanted to, but yeah, it's just a little too expensive. But still, I do have Max, so I watched it on there. Um, so The Last of Us was a surprise to say the least. So, a little bit of backstory. Now, as I've said before, I am not much of a gamer. I vastly prefer movies over video games, and that kind of makes me a bit of a third wheel. Well, actually, no, not so much anymore because that old friend group has kind of disbanded. But I used to be the third wheel in a lot of my groups of friends because they would all be gamers and I would just be sitting here as the lonely movie fan. And that would always really frustrate me growing up because so many people love video games and so many people devote so much of their lives to just playing video games nonstop. Like they sacrifice their families, their relationships, even their own health just to just play video games nonstop, hours, days, weeks upon end. And that kind of culture is really toxic and really off-putting to me. That's a big reason why I've never been much of a gamer, but just in general, video games don't float my boat nearly as much. And um I'm very picky when it comes to the kind of games that I play. I don't much care for fighting games. I don't like RPGs. I don't like puzzle games. Um, I don't like racing games. I don't like simulator games. Um, yeah, I'm just not much. I'm not much of a gamer. I like first person shooters. But even then, I'm very picky when it comes to first person shooters that I like. I've stated this before. I love Doom and I love Halo, the two biggest like non whack no, not really. I don't like Battlefield. I don't like Call of Duty. I don't like Modern Warfare. I absolutely despise so many of modern FPS games. Destiny, that's another one. That's a big one. Um, that I dislike. But yeah, I like Doom and I like Halo. And there's another video game franchise that I really do like that I can definitively say I am a fan of, and that will be the Last of Us series. Currently there's only 2 games, but still. Yeah, I am a big fan of the Last of Us series. Here we are. So, when it comes to the Last of Us, my personal history for um this game. So back in early to mid 2014, I believe, I was at one point subscribed to two of the three biggest video game YouTubers, them being like PewDiePie, Markiplier, and Jacksepticeye. I was at one point subscribed to Markiplier and Jacksepticeye. I thought those two were funny as fuck for a long time. I've since long moved on and unsubscribed from those two. They just didn't really float my boat much anymore, and they just weren't giving me content that I was interested in watching. But there was another gamer YouTuber that I was subscribed to, and he sadly he no longer exists because he's gotten himself into a lot of controversies. But for a long time, he was called Red Wolf Gamer. Before his channel disappeared, he renamed it to I think I Am Red Wolf. Um, but when The Last of Us came out, he got this big campaign to get himself a PS3, and he got himself The Last of Us. And he did a playthrough of the first Last of Us game, and I had absolutely no idea what The Last of Us was. I did not see a single trailer or ad on TV or YouTube or whatever. I saw nothing, absolutely nothing advertising this game. So I see all these videos that Red Wolf Gamer is pumping out called The Last of Us parts 1, 2, 5, 8, 28 and 30. I'm just like, what is The Last of Us? So I didn't really give a shit. But I broke down, and oddly, I watched the 30th and final part of his playthrough, and I was like, "Ooh, what is this?" So I started at part 1, and I blew I blew through Red Wolf Gamer's playthrough of The Last of Us so fast. I was so addicted to just watching this playthrough. This was a video game that I had never ever seen before. So come 2016 or 17, I went to my local pawn shop, and what do I happen to find on PS3? The Last of Us, the original release for PS3. This game did originally come out in 2013. It was a PS3 exclusive. It's a Sony exclusive, alongside Sony's Spider-Man games and their God of War series. But oddly enough, though, I didn't play actually like myself actually play The Last of Us until 2020 when I got this place, and when I finally hooked up my PS3 and said, "You know what? Well, those videos don't exist anymore, but I've never actually played this game, and I've owned this for almost 3 years now." The second game had just come out sometime, prior in the year, so it kinda just had me in a mood, so I finally said, "Fuck it." I grabbed my copy, I put it in, and I had myself another Last of Us experience. So when it was announced that a Last of Us series was being made, I was very excited. Um, Especially when I heard that creator Neil Druckmann would be heavily involved with its production. I was very confident that they could give us a very good adaptation of the game. I was especially excited when they announced that it would not be a movie, it would be a show, which, especially with the success of this show, if you're going to adapt a video game, you cannot from here on out adapt it as a movie. It's better off to be adapted as a show, which seemingly is what this Peacock Twisted Metal series is following in this show's footsteps and doing the same thing, which I applaud that series for doing so. But yeah, when I heard that this was being made, I was very excited and I eagerly awaited its release. Um but I was bitterly disappointed when they debuted The Last of Us in January of 2023 that they would be releasing only one episode a week. So I was like, fuck, you guys have already made me wait almost 3 years for this fucking show. And now you're going to make me wait even longer. I did not watch each episode week by week. I waited until all 9 episodes were available and I plowed through as much of the show as I could day after day. Um, and I was very impressed. I had replayed the first game 2 or 3 times before I watched the show, and I had just got done playing the second game for the first time not long before this started. So I was in a heavy Last of Us mood when this was coming out. And yeah, again, I was very impressed with this show. I was absolutely blown away with how well they adapted it. I had a couple issues here and there, which I will get into with this review, but overall, this is now, in my opinion, the new golden standard for video game adaptations. I still love Rampage and I still love Doom 2005, but in my opinion, this is hands down the greatest adaptation of a video game ever made. And this should be the new standard and measuring stick that future video game adaptations should look back upon. Whenever they're going to say, hey, what are we going to do? Like if they're going to do another Tomb Raider adaptation, or, well, I mean, they have done that with Resident Evil, but and a proper, decent, full on adaptation of Resident Evil, or like what they're doing with Twisted Metal, and like, or The Legend of Zelda, or, oh, again, they did do that too with Halo. Or if they were to do another Doom adaptation, this is the measuring stick that studios should use from now on. Because this is how you fucking adapt a game into a show. This is fucking great. Alrighty, so with all that being said, let us jump right into the plots for the first season of The Last of Us. Before we begin, word from our sponsor. Episode 1, titled When You're Lost in the Darkness. In 2003, a mass fungal infection of mutated cordyceps sparks a global pandemic. Joel Miller, played by Pedro Pascal, flees with his daughter Sarah and his brother Tommy, played by Gabriel Luna from Terminator Dark Fate, from their Texas home. Again, Texas, Gabriel Luna. Gabriel Luna. Sarah is killed by a soldier. And 20 years later, Joel lives in a quarantine zone, or QZ, in Boston, managed by the Federal Disaster Response Agency, FEDRA, working as a smuggler with his partner Tess. Ugh. When Tommy fails to contact them from Wyoming, they pay a local dealer, Robert, for a car battery, but he scams them and sells it to the Fireflies, a rebel group opposing Fedra. Attempting to retrieve it, Joel and Tess encounter Marlene, played by the same actress who played the same character in the original game, the Fireflies' leader, who begs them to take a teenager named Ellie, played by Bella Ramsey, to the Massachusetts State House in exchange for a working truck. While sneaking out of the QZ, the three run into a soldier on the outside. He tests them for the infection and reveals that Ellie is positive. Joel kills the soldier, and Ellie claims to be immune. Episode 2, titled Infected. By the way, as per usual with my TV show reviews, the plot section is kind of the most tedious, so please bear with me. Yeah, episode 2, titled Infected. 2 days before the worldwide outbreak in Jakarta, Indonesia, government officials show an infected corpse to a mycologist who tells them there is no cure or vaccine and advises bombing the entire city to prevent further outbreak. This obviously did not work. In the present, Ellie explains to Joel and Tess that she is being transported west in hopes of being used to find a cure. Discovering that the path to the State House is swarmed with the infected, they cut through a history museum where they are attacked by blind infected known as clickers, and Ellie is bitten for a second time. They arrive at the State House but find the fireflies are all dead. Tess reveals that she was bitten while Ellie's bite begins to heal, proving her immunity. Joel shoots an infected, which alerts the swarm to their location. Tess convinces him to escape and take Ellie to their allies in Lincoln, Massachusetts, while she stays behind, blowing up the building and killing herself along with the horde. Episode 3, titled Long, Long Time, Joel and Ellie begin to hike and meet with Bill and Frank. Ellie sees evidence of the government's execution of innocents during the early days of the pandemic. Back in 2007, Frank leaves Baltimore and stumbles upon the compound of Bill, a paranoid survivalist, Burt Gummer essentially, who reluctantly takes him in. The men be. Well, no, I don't. I'll explain later. The two men begin a romance, sharing a love of music and food. Years later, Frank contacts Tess by radio, and the two groups enter a tenuous friendship. In the present, Frank is terminally ill, presumably cancer, and asks Bill to assist his suicide after they marry. Bill, not wanting to live without Frank, kills himself as well. When Joel and Ellie arrive, they discover a letter Bill left for Joel. Bill wrote that protecting Frank gave his life meaning and that he has bequeathed all of his supplies to Joel and Tess. Unbeknownst to Joel, Ellie takes Frank's pistol. They take Bill's truck and set out to find Tommy. Episode 4, titled Please Hold to My Hand. Traveling through Missouri, Joel and Ellie are forced to take a detour through Kansas City, where they are ambushed by raiders. Joel kills two of the bandits, but a third overpowers him and nearly chokes him to death before Ellie saves him by shooting the man with Frank's pistol. More bandits find the bodies. Their leader, Kathleen, played by Crazy Rose from Two and a Half Men, just as crazy here as she is in that show, believes Joel and Ellie might be in contact with a man named Henry and orders a manhunt. Joel counsels Ellie about the firefight and gives her the pistol back. Kathleen's second in command, Perry, thinks he has found Henry's hideout, but something is growing under the building. Kathleen orders it kept secret until they find Henry. Joel and Ellie sleep in a high-rise apartment for the night, hoping they can scout a way out of the city in daylight. They awaken to find Henry and his younger brother Sam holding them at gunpoint. Episode 5, entitled Endure and Survive. Did not intend for that to rhyme. Henry and Sam make a tentative truce with Joel and Ellie. Joel wants to part ways, but Henry proposes they escape the city together using underground tunnel routes that only Henry knows. Joel hesitantly agrees, and Henry confesses to Joel that he was responsible for the death of Kathleen's brother, turning him over to Fedra in exchange for medication for Sam's leukemia. Ellie and Sam quickly become friends. After escaping through the tunnels, the group is attacked by a sniper from an upper story window. Joel sneaks up and kills him, but finds out he was radioing Kathleen, who arrives with her militia. Before Kathleen can kill Henry, a horde of infected emerge from underground, including a large bloater that beheads Perry and a child clicker that mauls Kathleen. After the group escape to a motel, Sam shows Ellie he was bitten on the leg. The next morning, Sam is infected and attacks Ellie. Henry kills him before killing him himself. That's fucked up. Joel and Ellie bury them and set off on foot heading west. Episode 6, entitled Kin. 3 months after Henry and Sam's deaths, Joel and Ellie reach a small, thriving community in Jackson, Wyoming, where Joel is reunited with Tommy, whose wife Maria, played by one of the main characters from True Blood, yet another HBO show. Who is she played by? No, it doesn't say. Ellie learns about Sarah's fate from Maria, and Joel confides in Tommy about Ellie's immunity and his own declining mental state. Joel asks Tommy to take Ellie to the Fireflies as she is afraid he cannot keep her safe. Ellie overhears them and confronts Joel, who insists they will part ways. Joel changes his mind, not even 5 minutes later, after remembering Sarah, and he and Ellie travel to Colorado on horseback. They find the Fireflies have vacated their base, possibly relocating to a hospital in Salt Lake City, Utah. Joel and Ellie attempt to escape a group of raiders. When one of them attacks Joel, Joel kills him but is stabbed during the struggle. Joel and Ellie escape the others, but Joel soon collapses and falls off their horse, leaving Ellie unsure how to proceed. God damn this episode. Episode 7, Left Behind. Ellie and an injured Joel sheltered in an abandoned house. As Joel approaches death, he urges Ellie to leave him. Ellie remembers her time in Fedra Military School, which she attended with her best friend Riley. While Ellie causes trouble and fights with her peers, Riley ran away and has been missing for 3 weeks. Riley sneaks back into their dorm room and reveals to Ellie she has joined the Fireflies. She brings Ellie to an abandoned mall where they explore a photo booth, an arcade, and a carousel. Riley tells Ellie the Fireflies have assigned her to a post in Atlanta, and it is her last night in Boston. Ellie is upset but convinces Riley to stay, and they kiss. An infected attacks the two, and Ellie kills it, but both are bitten during the struggle. Tearfully, they decide to stay together and wait for the infection to take hold. In the present, Ellie finds a sewing needle and stitches Joel's wound. Episode 8, When We Are in Need. Ellie leaves Joel, who is still recovering, to hunt for food. After shooting a deer, she tracks the wounded animal and encounters a preacher named David and his fellow hunter James, played by Troy Baker, the original actor who played Joel in The Last of Us 1 and 2. She trades her deer for penicillin, and David reveals the man who stabbed Joel was a member of his group. Ellie leaves to treat Joel. The next day, she discovers David and his men have followed her to seek vengeance on Joel. She flees to draw them away, but is captured. At David's camp, he reveals he has been feeding his group human flesh. Meanwhile, Joel awakens and tortures some of David's men into telling him Ellie's whereabouts. Fucking popping his fucking kneecap off. David and James attempt to kill Ellie, but she kills James and escapes. David hunts her down and tries to rape her, but she kills him with a meat cleaver. Joel finds a traumatized Ellie outside the cult's burning community center and comforts her. Episode 9, the season finale, entitled Look for the Light. In a flashback, Ellie's mother, Anna, played by Ashley Johnson, who played Ellie in The Last of Us 1 and 2, is bitten by an infected as she gives birth to Ellie. She is found by Marlene, who hesitantly takes Ellie and kills Anna at the latter's request. In the present day, Joel tells Ellie of his suicide attempt after Sarah's death. Firefly soldiers capture Ellie and knock Joel unconscious. After Joel awakes in a hospital, Marlene explains that doctors are preparing Ellie for surgery in hope of developing a cure. And Joel protests that he realizes the procedure will kill her. Marlene orders Joel to be taken away. He escapes and kills several Firefly soldiers, including those who surrender, and kills Ellie's surgeon for resisting. Joel carries an unconscious Ellie from the hospital. Marlene intercepts him, or them, stating there is still time to find a cure, but Joel shoots and kills her. When Ellie awakens, Joel lies and tells her the Fireflies had already failed to develop a cure from other immune people. As they hike to Jackson, Ellie insists that Joel swear his story about the Fireflies is true. When he does so, she replies, "Okay." Thus ending the series. Okay. So how about this plot? Well, in two ways. Oh, Vic is here. Hello. Nope. In two aspects. As a zombie story, it is in many ways fairly typical. It does feel superficially similar to The Walking Dead. Um, it's a post-apocalypse. It's an extremely cruel, brutal, gritty, dark new world post-zombie apocalypse. A lot of the characters are very kind of questionable in how likable they are. Everybody is very grizzled and gritty and um, cold and hard. The world is brutal. It's violent. It's fucked up. But I love it. And it has a lot of elements that make it feel a lot more unique. This, in my opinion, is what The Walking Dead should have turned into, or at least something very similar. Um, I love this version of a zombie apocalypse, and I know that they're never called zombies; they're just called infected. But I mean, especially in the games, the infected do kill and eat humans, presumably. Actually, yeah, they do. So, they're zombies. I don't give a shit what you say. They just so happen to be fungal zombies. But I'll talk about that later. So while the plot as a zombie apocalypse story could be seen as maybe not more of the same, but it could be somewhat typical, how it's done feels a lot more original, and there's much more of a balance in terms of its threat. one of the biggest things that kills so much zombie media for me is the fact that at some point, the writers and directors of zombie movies, shows, and even books, eventually the threat is skewed more towards the human versus human side of things. And to me, that bores the shit out of me. I don't give two shits about humans fighting each other in a zombie apocalypse. I've always been much more of a fan of the idea of just all humans banding together in order to fight against a greater threat. Sadly, I can't think of any zombie media off the top of my head that does do that. So seems I'm still looking for that. But it also another thing that really kills that for me is because that takes away from the focus of what it's supposed to be. It's a zombie movie. It's supposed to be about killing zombies. Why am I watching humans kill each other? I could watch that in an action movie. That's the one of the biggest things that absolutely killed The Walking Dead for me. It stopped being about The Walking Dead. It just became about humans fighting humans, and I just don't give two shits about that anymore. The Last of Us does a much better balance of still keeping the zombies as a full, present, real threat, but it does have human versus human drama. It feels appropriate, but it never overstays its welcome, thankfully. And I love that about this series. And as a video game adaptation, this show is fabulous. This does make some changes here and there, but of all of the video game adaptations that I've seen, this is hands down the most accurate. And I do believe that had to do with the fact that Neil Druckmann, the creator of the Last of Us games, was heavily involved with the production of this show. He himself actually, I believe, uh he was a co-writer throughout the entire show. He co-wrote episode 9 and he fully wrote episode 7. Oh, damn, that's my least favorite one. He is an executive producer and he was also a director of episode 2, Infected. Um and yeah, I do believe that it's because Neil was so heavily involved that this series is very accurate and very close to the original game. Um, that can be seen as both a good and a bad thing. Maybe not quite so much a bad thing, but this show is very close to the original game. I'd say it's between 85 to 90% accurate to the game. It's a very strong, very faithful adaptation of its source material. And it's done in a way that feels respectful to the fans. This isn't some studio just taking the property and doing their own thing with it and just slapping the name on it just for marquee value. This is a studio that took this property and hired a bunch of people that are obviously fans of the source material. They were not messing around with adapting this show, and Neil Druckmann wasn't messing around either. There's a long production history, from what I can see here, like the development of this show that took place over the course of several years. And Neil Druckmann was always trying to be as like involved with the production as much as he could. That's a documentary in and of itself, which I'm sure that'll be made at some point. Um, so I'm not really going to go over that, but there was a long and arduous journey in order to get The Last of Us adapted to the big screen. And it finally happened, and it paid off. But yeah, as an adaptation of its source material, it's fucking phenomenal. It's very accurate to its source material. It does follow the same story as the first game. It hits all of the same beats and it feels very familiar. Any fan or even casual gamer or moviegoer can take one look at this series and just say that's The Last of Us. Yeah. If you play the game, you're watching the show. There are some changes done here or there, mostly in the beginning and middle of the show. But like the first the second quarter and the third, well, the middle half, but the second quarter and the third quarter of the show is when they deviate the most from the game. And the way I describe it as they expand in areas and they uh, constrict in areas. They expand on some scenes and they cut some scenes down in those sections, but especially the first third and the last third is when the show is at its most faithful to the source material. But all across the board, the whole thing just feels like The Last of Us. It feels like the game was transformed into a show. And I almost kind of hesitate to call this a show, because it's only 9 episodes, but it doesn't feel like a show necessarily. This does not feel episodic whatsoever, in my opinion. This just feels like a 9 hour long movie. Um, and I love that about this show. So yeah, as an adaptation of its source material, it's fantastic. And as a typical zombie apocalypse thing, while it can be seen as typical, it's very well done. Like I've said before, when it comes to zombie movies and zombie shows, it's not what you do, but how you do it. And in this case, it does a bit of both. It does something a little new, but it also executes a tried and true formula so well that you don't care that it's another zombie show. It's so well done that you don't care because it's so good. So, with all that being said, let us get into the pros and cons, of which I have 10/12 pros and 5 cons. And some of them are nitpicks. Alrighty, so pro number one is Joel, played by Pedro Pascal. Now, a lot of people knew who Pedro Pascal was due to the success of The Mandalorian, myself included. I had no clue who the hell Pedro Pascal was before The Mandalorian. I had not even seen hide nor hair of him beforehand. The Mandalorian launched his career, like really, really launched his career. Um, he also he was like well known for Oberyn Mantell in Game of Thrones because he got his head squished by the mountain in one episode. Um, and he also played one of the main characters in the show Narcos, which I've only seen one episode of. And now, because of Pedro Pascal in being in this series, I'm gonna have to go back and actually watch that show because I actually ended up giving it away. But whatever. So yeah, Pedro Pascal was kind of a nobody to me before this show. Like even with The Mandalorian, I just kind of didn't care because The Mandalorian doesn't really impress me. So when Pedro was announced to be the actor portraying Joel, I'll admit I was a little disappointed because I could already tell before this was coming out from like little bits and pieces I was hearing here and there that the show was going to be a very faithful adaptation of the game. So I was kind of hoping that they would just cast Troy Baker as Joel, because Joel in game looks very similar to Troy Baker in real life. So I'm just like, well, why not just cast Troy? I have no idea why they didn't cast Troy Baker as Joel, but Pedro Pascal actually surprised the shit out of me by absolutely nailing Joel. Um, it is very similar, but it is also his, like, you can tell it's still Joel, but you can see that Pedro is making it more of his own role and doing a fabulous job at it too. Uh, Joel as a character, here he's described as a hardened middle-aged survivor who is tormented by the trauma of his past. In the show, Joel is more vulnerable as he is hard of hearing in one ear due to a gunshot, and his knees ache when he stands. Um, there's so much physical acting that Pedro puts into portraying Joel. He says a lot with just his face. He's very grizzled. He's very hard. He's very disgruntled. He's very bitter and he's very reserved and not broken, but kind of permanently damaged. Um, it's heavily implied in both the show and game that during that 20-year interim, Joel did a lot of nasty things in order to survive during the cordyceps outbreak. And you can tell that those have shaped him into a totally different man to what he was pre outbreak. And he says a lot with just his face. He gives a lot of cold, angry, bitter stares. He's kind of a man of few words. He doesn't really speak very much. And when he does, he's blunt and direct and to the point. Um, he talks low most of the time, just like in the game. And when he does raise his voice, it's when he's either um, being scary or he's just in a fight. Um, but Pedro absolutely nails the performance as Joel. You can still tell, oh yeah, that's Joel. That is absolutely Joel from The Last of Us. But thankfully, Pedro does do a couple things here and there that makes this version of Joel his own. Namely, by making Joel just a little bit more of a smartass in the show as opposed to the game. In the game, Joel is kind of humorless, but here he has a very blunt, sarcastic, not really a sense of humor, but he's just very, yeah, he's very sarcastic. But he also has some like slight touches of dad humor to his performance too. Seeing as how well, Joel was a dad before the outbreak, but he is also tasked with guarding and protecting a teenager across the country. So of course he's gonna his dad instincts are gonna be brought back up to the surface. And he incorporates some dad humor a little bit into his performance too, seeing as how Pedro Pascal is labeled as the internet's favorite daddy, which is ironic because Pedro actually doesn't have kids, but whatever. That's also has to do with the fact that he also protects Grogu in The Mandalorian. um, yeah, Pedro absolutely kills it as Joel. His performance is great. You can tell that he studied and learned how to be Joel from the game. And while it is somewhat his own thing, you can obviously tell, yeah, that's Joel. Pedro is absolutely killing it. Pro number two is Ellie, played by Bella Ramsey. I've never seen Game of Thrones, never seen anything else that Bella Ramsey has been in. I don't give two shits about Game of Thrones. But and I was also a little skeptical about Bella Ramsey as Ellie because I was like, I don't know how this is gonna turn out. And I wasn't one of those people. I learned about this at like last week as I was rewatching the show for the second time. Apparently, Bella Ramsey got a lot of criticism from people just saying, "Oh, she's too ugly to play Ellie." I'm like, "What? What the fuck?" I mean, I've actually come to find out that the Last of Us fan base are kind of a whiny bunch of assholes. Holy fucking shit! But I wasn't one of those people, I promise. But I was just a little skeptical. That kind of mostly had to do with I was like, well, why don't you just have Ashley? But I have come to realize that wouldn't really work because Ashley Johnson obviously is not 14 years old anymore. Um, so I was like, okay. But while Bella doesn't fully look like Ellie, it's Bella's performance that sells her as Ellie in this show. Her performance, her personality, her attitude and demeanor screams Ellie from the game. She's very sarcastic. She's very much a teenage girl, and a teenage girl that grew up in a blunt, brutal, gritty environment. She has zero filter. She gives no shits. She's very snobby and sarcastic and snobbish, just like a teenage girl. But it works. And that is a fun, it clashes with Joel's personality in a fun way. Like you can just tell these guys are just two different two sides of two different coins. So a lot of the fun in watching these two be a pair is just seeing them clash and butt heads. Not in an antagonistic way necessarily, but you can just tell Joel is very used to being on his own. He's very set in his ways. He's very square and blunt and no nonsense. And Ellie, she's described here as she has not lost her playfulness and bonds easily with children and has a fondness for puns, but she also displays much defiance and anger. And that does clash very well with Joel. But it is also very heartwarming watching these two get over their pasts and find strength in each other and bond as a pair, not romantically, as a father and daughter type relationship. It is described here that Ellie has a private need for kinship and belonging, which she finds very strongly with Joel. And watching these two bond over the course of the show is very heartwarming. So by the end of the series, you're fully invested in Joel saving Ellie, just like in the game. Um, and it's great. Bella Ramsey does a phenomenal job as Ellie. She kills the role. Again, she doesn't look like Ellie per se, but it's her performance that, like with Pedro, but Pedro still does look somewhat like Joel from the game. But with Bella, it's her performance. Doesn't always have to mean that a character has to look similar in an adaptation in order for the adaptation to work. Sometimes you just need a talented actress or actor. And in this case, I think it's very good. I already talked about this too, but I'll delve a little bit more into it. Pro number three is the game accuracy. Yeah, you can tell that the makers of this show are obviously fans of The Last of Us. The world looks very similar, very overgrown, very decrepit and decaying. Um, the clothes look very similar. Everybody never looks clean. They always look dirty and gritty and grubby all the time. Everything's run down and rusted and weathered and used. um, Even the clean, like the QZs, they always look dirty and run down and decrepit. Um, and of course, the infected look spot on. Whenever there's a place that's infested with cordyceps overgrowth, it looks like it's something right out of the games. The infected runners look spot on. The clickers look spot on from the games. And the one time that we see a bloater looks spot on from the games too. And the story itself, as I already mentioned, is very accurate to the source material. It hits the same beats as the first game, and it takes the same path as the first game. It takes a couple detours here and there, but it is the same as the first game. Like I said, if you play the first game, you watch the show essentially. It's both it's a good and not necessarily a bad thing, but I can see some people somewhat having an issue with how accurate, like people say, well, it's because you're just watching the game. I just feel like I could get a better version of this if I play the game. I don't think that myself. I wanted this show to be very accurate to the game. And I think this show, well, when the deviances are good, they do work. But yeah, for the most part, this is a very accurate adaptation of its source material, and I highly appreciate the filmmakers for doing so. Pro number four is this show has a big fucking budget. Um, I think this is like the most expensive show. Hold on. Um, Let me look this up. Oh, yep. The Last of Us show cost $100 million. Yeah, it had $100 million budget according to two sources. And well, that may not well, I mean it's $100 million. That's a big budget for a movie. But especially for a show, that's a big budget. That one because it's HBO, that's like Game of Thrones level budget. Not quite like it's low Game of Thrones budget, but yeah, that's big shit. And it shows. This show shows that it's got money. It looks very polished. It looks very clean in a big budget, spit and polish, cross your T's and dot your I's type of way. It looks like a lot of money was thrown at it, and it looks like people who were obviously fans, but they also had deep pockets were working on this show. It shows that it had a lot of money to work with. And I really appreciate that. In no way does this show look cheap. Not much to say about that, but I really appreciate that this had a big budget, obviously. Pro number five is Cordyceps itself slash the zombies. Um, Cordyceps itself. So Cordyceps is a real life fungal. Let me look. I gotta look this up too. It's a species of fungus. It's a species of they're called endoparasitoids, parasitic mainly on insects and other arthropods, and a few are parasitic on other fungi or fungi, however it's pronounced. Yeah, it's a real life type of fungus. Um, and this show introduces a fictionalized version of cordyceps. So what cordyceps does, um, when it attacks a host, the mycelium invades and eventually replaces the host's tissue, while elongated fruit body called ascocarp may be cylindrical, branched, or of complex shape that eventually breaks out and sprouts its way out of the host in order to spread itself. Um, Cordyceps can infect wasps, um, ants, and no, not frogs. Spiders too, I think. It essentially turns them into zombies. Um, yeah, kind of spooky. But this series and game introduces a fictional version of cordyceps that mutates and can infect and spread to humans, turning them into violent cannibalistic zombies. Um, And I think it's really cool. Nothing like this had really been seen before. Like nobody thought, huh, fungus zombies. But how it's done in the show and especially the games, I think is genius. It acts very similar to real life cordyceps, but the main difference is um, real cordyceps ants or wasps, they don't eat other ants or wasps. It just spreads all throughout a nest or all throughout a ant's body, so it can spread and spit out spores. It does that too here, but a main difference is that people who are infected with cordyceps in this game and show, they eat humans and animals too, but they eat flesh. And that makes them real a different kind of scary because not only do you have to worry about being torn apart by zombies. But if you get infected, eventually you get fungus plates that grow out of your face and turn you blind. It covers over your entire body, and eventually, the fungus keeps spreading so far throughout your body that you eventually just stop and fuse into the environment, forever frozen, just producing spores. Um, It's creepy, it's gross. If you have, like, trypophobia or something along those lines, how the cordyceps looks in this show, and especially the games, will definitely get under your skin. But it's fascinating, and it's really cool. We see 3 different kinds of zombies. As I said, there's the runners, which are the recently infected. They just have, like, small fungus spurts coming out all throughout their body, but they just look like humans. They can still run and see and, um, they're quite fast, and it's hard to outrun those. That's why they're called runners. There's clickers, which is the second variant. Clickers are blind because cordyceps grows primarily all over the host's brain, and eventually the fungus plates grow out the infected's face, and it obscures their vision. So they travel via echolocation made by this harsh, 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 sharp clicking sound. Like if Bella Ramsey was here, she'd be able to do it pretty well. It's like a sounds. That's how they travel. It's via echolocation. And then the third variant that we see is called a bloater. It's an old, giant, mutated clicker that has its entire body covered with fungal plates. And in some places, they've hardened to become like strong body armor. It also enhances their strength somewhat, and it makes them a lot larger too. They're essentially the tanks of the infected world. We only see one in the show, which is a little bit of a disappointment, but it looks spot on accurate to the games. You take one look at it, you're just like, that's a bloater. Those are clickers. Those are runners. And that adds itself to the game accuracy too. You can take one look at cordyceps and just be like, yep, that's from The Last of Us. Pro number 6 is the musical score. Oh man. Okay, so the music was done by Gustavo Santaolalla, as well as David Fleming. Gustavo did the music for The Last of Us 1 and 2, the games. And that was a gigantic surprise for me because you hear all the time that video game movies do not adapt music if there's iconic music. Like, they don't use any Doom music in either of the Doom games. They don't use any Rampage music in the Rampage movie. There's no Street Fighter music, as far as I know, in the Street Fighter movie. Um, I don't recall there. No, there's a little bit of Mortal Kombat music in the 2021 movie. But in the 90s movies, I don't think there was any music from the Mortal Kombat games in those films. But it's a very common stereotype that video game adaptations barely use music. And I greatly appreciate that not only does this show use a lot of music from the games, the composer himself from the games composes a lot of the music for this show. And I was absolutely blown away when that was announced. I was like, wow, that's cool. And when I watched this show, I was like, oh God, yeah. That's another thing that makes this feel so spot on to The Last of Us. It sounds like The Last of Us. A lot of the music in The Last of Us games, it's kind of subtle. It's a lot of slow, low-pitched guitar music, like just somebody picking at a six string nonchalantly. But it's very effective. It's very creepy and emotional and romantic and sad at the same time because admittedly, The Last of Us, and especially The Last of Us 2, a lot of it's pretty bleak. So that music actually adds to the bleakness and it gives the fucked up and sad moments a greater punch. Um, so yeah, the music is great. And all the music that they take from the games, well, it's tweaked somewhat for the show, but it's done appropriately. You can still listen to it and just be like, that's The Last of Us. Without a shadow of a doubt. That is The Last of Us music. And Gustavo does a phenomenal job for this show. I hope he was paid well because he did great. My favorite piece of Last of Us music, like overall, is from the first game. But because this is an adaptation of the first game, this is very, very strong. The music in part two is very good as well. But yeah, the first game is where it's at for me. And the other music that is not worked on by Gustavo, done by David Fleming, it's kind of just more generic action or horror music. So it's not quite as memorable or effective, but it does what good music is supposed to do. It accentuates the action scenes or the horror scenes. And so good on it there. It at least does what it's supposed to do. Pro number 7, there's some good action scenes in this. There's some good fist fights. There's some good chases. There's some good shootouts. There's some good human versus zombie action. There's some good human versus human action. It's not none of the action scenes are super long. Probably the longest action scene overall is when the Kansas City Raiders are sieged by that giant group of infected that come out from underground in episode 5. But even then, that's only maybe a 5 or 6 minute long action scene, but it's tense, it's entertaining, it's hard hitting, and it's gnarly as fuck. Especially when Perry gets his head torn off by the fucking bloater. That's gnarly. More on that in just a moment. But yeah, not much to say, but overall the action scenes are quite good, thrilling, entertaining, well edited, and well choreographed. Cool. Pro number 8. By the way, pro number 6 was cordyceps itself slash the zombies. That's kind of two pros rolled into one. And pro number 8 here is also kind of two um, pros rolled into one. This show is quite violent. And it also has some very shocking moments, like good shocking moments. That's a weird thing to call good, but just bear with me. Hold on one second. Oh, shit. Okay, cool. My laptop is about to die. Um, yeah, this show is violent. It's not quite as violent as something, say, like Planet Terror or uh, Dawn of the Dead 78, or especially like Day of the Dead 85. I wouldn't say this is one of the goriest zombie shows I've ever seen. It's probably on par with The Walking Dead, but it's just very gritty and grungy. This is a harsh, fucked up, brutal world that these characters live in, and it's not a pretty sight. And this is not a pretty show. It is, but in like terms of its violence, it's very gnarly and very visceral. When people are attacked by infected, it's very vicious and visceral. There's lots of blood spraying all over the place. Um, when people get shot, there's a decent amount of blood. When Joel is beating the shit out of two raiders, it's also quite gnarly and quite shocking. Um, So to talk about that scene real quick, this scene upon rewatch actually made my scalp tighten. So in the show and game, when Ellie is kidnapped by the cannibals, Joel gets up in an injured state and goes to look for her. He's attacked by two raiders, and he knocks both of them out and brings them to a house. He's fucking them up left and right. So he goes to interrogate one guy. He sits in front of him, pulls out a knife, and smashes the knife right into the guy's knee. And in order to get him to talk, he twists the knife around in the guy's knee. And in the show, you just hear in the game, you just hear flesh tearing and the guy like groaning and grunting in pain. But in the show, when Joel twists the knife around in the guy's knee, you hear this dull, muffled, like popping sound. And he says in both the show and game, focus right here, or I'll pop your goddamn knee off. Um, and when you hear after he says that, when he twists the knife, when you hear that popping sound, you believe that he's really about to pop the guy's knee out of its fucking socket with his knife. And that sound effect just made my scalp tighten. It's a very violent, visceral beatdown. And once the guy gives him his information, Joel stabs him in the gut and then goes over to the second dude with the pipe. He's like, "Fuck you, man. I ain't saying shit." It's all right. I believe him. Whack! I love that scene. I said to Meadow, that's a taste of the Marauder Joel that we see in, or we presume we would have seen in the 20-year interim uh, before the real main story of this show started. But it's one of my favorite scenes. And just to go through the rest ooh, of the shocking moments in this show, when Sarah is killed at the beginning, it's just as fucked up and powerful as it is in the game. It's also very shocking. Um, when Tess is revealed to be infected, that's messed up. And shocking. Even though I fucking hate Tess, she's so unlikable. When it's revealed that she's been infected this whole time, it does come as a shock. Um, and specifically talking about the show. Um, when the bloater tears off Perry's head, that is a gnarly sight to behold. That is a bloater kill that is done in the Last of Us game, but we never really fully see it before someone's head is torn off in the game. But we do in the show, and it's very gnarly and visceral. When Kathleen gets killed by the child clicker, it's quick, but you're just like, whoa, what the fuck? Um, when Joel goes on his killing spree in the hospital in the final episode, that's not really a shocking moment, but you just kind of sit there and you just watch him mercilessly gun down people left and right. So it's quite violent and cold. But hands down, the two most shocking and visceral moments, aside from Joel interrogating the two dudes, is A, when Henry commits suicide after shooting Sam. And so I'll talk about that real quick. So the first moment in the show, Sam reveals to Ellie that he was bitten by a zombie. And Ellie has a theory that if she takes some of her blood and rubs it onto Sam's bite wound, maybe that could be the source of the cure. So maybe that could either stave off the infection or just cure him. It's just a theory. So by the time Ellie wakes up, at first you might think that it might have worked, but then because Sam is deaf and mute, he's just kind of sitting there, not really responding to Ellie when she's saying, "Hey, are you okay?" She goes over and touches his shoulder, and then he turns around and he's got messed up eyes and some fungus coming out of his face, and that's when you realize, oh yeah, that didn't work. But it's just as powerful in the show as it is in the game. Sam pops out of a door and like is trying to attack Ellie. Joel is about to grab his gun, but Henry like shoots at the floor in order to get him to stop. So then Henry shoots Sam, and he's like he's pointing the gun shakily at Joel. He's like, what did I do, Sam?" And then he just turns the gun, and it's so fast you can snap your fingers. He's just boom, and it's very shocking, and it just kind of leaves you standing like, oh, that's fucked up. But hands down, the most visceral scene, more visceral in the show than it is in the game. So when Ellie is kidnapped by David and the cannibals, David's stalking her throughout the community center in this cult's village. It's slowly catching fire, and the fire's spreading, and she's trying to get out, and he's trying to find her. But he eventually catches her and he pins her to the ground, and it's very pedophilic. And it's highly implied that he was about to do some unspeakable things to her. So she's screaming and sobbing and trying to get free. And right as David starts to undo his fly, there's a meat cleaver that he had in his hand that Ellie grabs onto. She whacks him in the shoulder or the neck. So then she gets on top of him and just starts wailing down on David. We don't see the meat cleaver hacking into David's face. We just see her repeatedly slamming this meat cleaver down onto David. And after about the fourth or fifth um slash, all you hear is Ellie screaming and grunting and slashing and hacking. She slashes him 22 fucking times. This scene plays out very similar in the game. The only difference is Ellie hacks up David only 11 times in the game, whereas here it's 22. And I'm sure, well, in both cases, it would have looked like this, but in the show especially, David probably just looked like mincemeat. And it's very shocking, very visceral, and very violent and vicious. But it's well deserved and quite cathartic, in my opinion. Probably the peak of Bella Ramsey's acting as Ellie in this episode, because afterwards she's dazed and kind of confused, and when Joel like grabs onto her, she doesn't know that it's Joel, but as soon as she sees that it's Joel, she just goes almost catatonic. She stutters and mumbles and grumbles. She just like can't speak, so she just hugs him. And that scene almost kind of like brings a little tear to my eye whenever I see that. Bella Ramsey's acting is spot on. And everybody loves listening to Joel call Ellie baby girl. I think it's quite cute in the game and the show. Speaking of which, too, well, I kind of already talked about this, but pro number 9 is the great emotional moments. I'll save that. Um, I will also talk. So the pro number 9, the real pro number 9, is the special effects. There is a fair bit of CGI used in this show, but the clickers and runners are done in like obviously, in my opinion, a hybrid of having a lot of practical effects on the zombies, but they're digitally enhanced. But I'm okay with it because it's a very good blending of the two effects. There is a lot of practicals, but for like oh, clickers' mouths and like the fungus spores as they're crawling out of an infected's mouth, that's CGI. When they get shot and a lot of blood is a lot of CGI. But there is a lot of practical effects on zombies too. And clickers. The bloater is fully CGI, but it looks great. I love the fact that it's mostly illuminated by just fire, so it looks creepier. But it also hides the fact more that it's fully CGI. A lot of the explosions are CGI, but there's also a lot of practical explosions too. Um, there's a lot of green screen effects too, but they look good. They're blended well with the environment. And again, there's a blend of both green screen effects and real location shooting. The gore effects are good, the gunshots are good, the headshots are good. Overall, the special effects in this show are spot on. A great hybridization of practical effects and digital effects, in my opinion. One of the best examples, and especially in the last 5 or 6 years. But the proper pro number 10 is the great emotional moments. The Last of Us is a very brutal and fucked up, mean spirited world, just like in the game. And this leaves you with a lot of conflicted feelings, just like with the game. But um, watching Sarah die, it's fucked up, but it is properly like it's a good gut punch. It gets you hooked in and it immediately makes you sympathetic for Joel because if anybody was to lose their child to a piece of shit soldier that just started gunning people down, yeah, that's heartbreaking. Um it's very believable, as I said, watching Joel and Ellie bond and get closer as the show goes on, and you buy their relationship and you buy their bond, and it's very you get very invested in it, and it's very believable. It's well written and it's well acted. When Henry commits suicide, it's a big gut punch and it's very shocking. When Ellie massacres David, it's very visceral and violent, and you feel for Ellie in that scene, and it's very heartwarming seeing Joel come out of nowhere to come to her rescue and just cradle her in his arms and call her baby girl. It's cute and it's sweet. But the best of the emotional impact is the ending, in my opinion. Just like for the ending to the original game, it does leave you having mixed feelings morally. Was Joel in the right for massacring an entire group of people to just save one person who potentially could have been the source of a cure to the zombie apocalypse? Like, do you support Joel doing this? Or do you think Joel is in the wrong? And the ending leaves you in kind of this morally gray area emotionally, in my opinion. It just makes you feel like, damn, I don't know how to feel about this. I ultimately am just team, yeah, Joel was in the right. Joel should have saved her, which makes some choices in The Last of Us 2 not really sit with me very well, but that's a completely different story. Um, um, so yeah, this is definitely one of the strongest uh shows to have a great emotional impact, and especially in the last 5 years. It's just another aspect of the game accuracy. It it gives you major gut punches throughout the show, and it leaves you with a lot of these morally questionable moments that just kind of give you mixed feelings. Like, do you support this or do you not support this? Do you go half and half or do you stay out of it? It's it's just like the games, and it's very well done. I love it. So yeah, definitely great emotional moments. So with all these great things to say about this show, I have 5 cons and 4 bullet points that I want to talk about. Con number one is there are some omitted scenes that I have a problem with. Namely, so like I said, I think the part of the show where they omit the most scenes from the game is in episodes 6, 7, and some of 8. Specifically, when Ellie and David first meet in the middle of the woods, um, in the game, Ellie and David fight off a group infected together. In the game, they do not. They meet in the middle of the woods, they find shelter from the cold, and then Ellie finds out that these two have been looking for her, and then they come after her and Joel. That's it. The scene in the game with Ellie and David versus all the infected, it kind of lulls you into thinking that David may not be such a bad guy. And that's why it comes as much more of a shock when we find out, oh yeah, these are the bad guys that we're working with here. And so it kind of leaves you in this state of feeling antsy and anxious, like knowing, oh yeah, these are the bad guys. What's going to happen here? But in the show, that scene with David and Ellie versus the zombies is completely removed. So it just feels a little rushed, like they meet in the middle of the woods, and then all of a sudden, oh yeah, we're part of the bad guys that were chasing you back in Colorado. And then Ellie hightails it out of there, and then she gets captured. And specifically with that too, there was a lot of scene. Well, I'll talk about that later, actually. So I'll skip the second bullet point, but the last two bullet points, um, one is Joel's injury. This might sound like a very strange complaint to have, but um, just bear with me. So, and this has to do too, it follows my fourth bullet point, the university investigation. So, when Ellie and Joel leave Jackson, Wyoming, they go to Colorado, the University of Colorado, because that's where a Firefly base has been set up. And in the game, they spent almost a good hour investigating the place, searching it for fireflies and searching it for any kind of clues or equipment that they could use. And it's just a ghost town, aside from a few stray infected here and there. And it builds a lot of suspense and it hooks the viewers in, like urging you to explore this school, trying to find out what the hell happened here? What's going on here? What are we going to do? But in the show, it is so rushed and it's so trimmed down. They walk into the school, they search for not even 2 minutes. They come across a room full of monkeys, and then they just see a map that just literally just holds their hand and puts a big sign on where they're supposed to go to next. And then after that, when Joel and Ellie are ambushed by raiders, Joel gets injured. In the game, it is way more visceral and way more fucked up. Joel is attacked by a raider and they fall off a balcony. And Joel falls on a long, sharp piece of rebar that completely impales him in the lower abdomen. Joel is fucked the fuck up in the game. And after he passes out from blood loss, there's a good chunk of the game where you're playing as Ellie protecting Joel. And especially in the DLC to this game, they show more scenes of Ellie protecting Joel from raiders and trying to fix him up. It added to their bond, but it also added more to Ellie's character, that she's learning how to take care of herself and she's learning how to be a leader and a protector and provider. It adds more to her character and it strengthens her resolve. But here, that scene is cut short. All of those scenes with Ellie protecting Joel are removed, and Joel's injury is tamed way down. Here in the show, Joel is attacked by a raider with a baseball bat. He cracks it over a tree, or no, yeah, he cracks over a tree, and Joel like tackles the guy and snaps his neck. Then he turns around and finds that a piece of the baseball bat was stabbed into Joel's stomach. Not to say that's not a serious injury, but the piece of the baseball bat was only about that far stabbed into his stomach. Not nearly as visceral and not nearly as shocking or violent. That's another shocking scene when Joel gets injured in the game. You don't see it coming, and it's incredibly visceral and violent because it looks fucking painful. But here, he just gets shanked with a sharp piece of wood. It's kind of lame and makes Joel look like a little bit of a pushover. Again, not to say that's not a serious injury, and that can be a serious injury, but compared to the game, Joel getting hurt in the show feels way toned down. And it just makes, yeah, it makes Joel look like a little bit of a pushover. So yeah, all those omitted scenes I have an issue with. These next three cons, they all kind of have to do with each other. Con number two is some of the additions, because, like I said, the show expands in areas and shortens in other areas. And I say it expands unnecessarily and it answers questions that we did not need to have answered. As cool as it is to see Ashley Johnson as Anna, Ellie's mother, give birth to Ellie, we didn't need to see it. It could have just been explained through dialogue. And in the game, it is explained through dialogue. And we just get that picture in our head, and that's all we need. We don't need to see Ellie be born. Um, and we don't need to see the origin of where Ellie got her trademark switchblade knife. It's cool, but we don't really need to see it. And so this was the first episode of The Last of Us that got review bombed. Episode 3, the Bill and Frank episode. The first episode of the show is an hour and 20 minutes long. Episode 3 is an hour and 18 minutes long. And a good 40 to 45 minutes of the episode's runtime is a love story between Bill and Frank. And a lot of people were not happy with that. Now, not to sound like one of those people, I actually didn't mind it. I think it is kind of a cute little love story. But I do think it goes on just a little bit too long. But my main criticism, it's more just like a question. Did we need to see this? Like, is this absolutely necessary to the show's story? Yes and no, but mostly no. It could have been trimmed to like a 20-minute section, not 45 minutes. I do think it just goes on a little bit too long. It ends on a very bleak and sad note. Like, why did we have to watch two men commit suicide because they don't want to lose each other? I mean, I get the message and I get the intent. It is sweet and romantic, to quote Frank, admittedly. But yeah, that's my main question. Do we really need to see this? No, I don't think so. I like it. It's cute, it's enjoyable, but it does go on a little bit too long. Um, but the biggest con that I have with this show, hands down, is episode 7. This is the only episode of this entire show that I dislike. I love every other episode except this. Episode 7 is not an adaptation of the game. It's an adaptation of the Left Behind DLC for the first Last of Us game. And that in and of itself really wasn't necessary too. It's barely an hour and a half long total with gameplay and cutscenes, but it just explores the backstory of how Ellie and Riley got infected. It takes place 3 weeks before the events of the beginning of the main story in The Last of Us. And the DLC itself, I mean, it's okay. I think it also suffers from this problem too, but especially in the show, episode 7 is 58 minutes long. And I would say that it is 50 minutes of nothing but filler. Filler that we did not need to see, of Ellie and Riley acting like a couple of teenagers going throughout an abandoned mall, giving off a big Stranger Things vibe. Um, it's dull, boring and slow, and it feels completely pointless, and it brings the pace of the story to a complete screeching halt. And it does this at the sacrifice because in that DLC, not only is it just flashbacks between Ellie and Riley, but it like takes place during that time when Joel was injured after his accident at the university, and they're also trapped in an abandoned mall, and Ellie is fighting off a group of raiders by herself, protecting an injured Joel. Had the episode done that, where it was like a balance of present stuff with Ellie protecting Joel and the backstory between Ellie and Riley, that would have been better. But most of the episode is just the stuff between Ellie and Riley, and it's boring as fuck. That was another episode that got review bombed and people just saying it's woke filler. Now, I don't think that it's woke because they do show in the DLC that Ellie is gay, as they do in this episode too. So I don't think it's woke, but it is filler, and it's boring as fuck. It sticks out like a sore thumb compared to the rest of the show. And from here on out, it's the only episode of this show that I will skip. It is so goddamn pointless. Whew. So, with all that being said, The Last of Us 2023 is pretty damn fucking awesome. I'm a big fan of The Last of Us, so I had high hopes going into this show. And this definitely exceeded all my expectations. Again, there's a couple things that I would have done differently, but overall, this is a damn solid adaptation of a video game and a great first season to The Last of Us show. I eagerly await season 2. Just please, for the love of God, do not kill off Joel. Do not kill off Pedro Pascal. This show got massive reviews and multiple Emmy nominations. And it was like the biggest viewed debut of a show when it first came out. And they should take some lessons on what's going on with The Witcher right now. If they kill off Joel, it'll tank this show. And I hope that does not happen because I want to see more. I wanted to give this show a 10 out of 10. It wouldn't have been a solid gold 10 out of 10, but it would have been a 10. But with how much they emit, and with episode 7 being episode 7, I cannot give this show a perfect 10, unfortunately. So I will be giving this show as close as I can, and I'll be giving it a very solid 9.5 out of 10. It's an excellent start to an excellent show, and it's one of my favorite zombie shows of all time now. I love the crap out of it. If you're a Last of Us fan, you will be very pleasantly surprised with this series. Sure, it's just watching the first game, but it's so well done, you really shouldn't care. So, with all that being said, post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. And as always, I will see you guys in the next video.